co-chair of the Armenian Assembly of America, Énthonì Barsamyan, is in our studio tonight. Mr. Barsamyan, thank you so much for sitting down with the public TV.
Thank you, Astrid. Good to see you again.
What brings you to Armenia this time?
We are obviously here. Our hearts go out to the citizens of Artsakh, and we're here to assess the situation on the ground. We had meetings in Washington just before coming to Armenia. So the purpose of the visit is to understand what is happening here in Armenia, what is potentially going to happen in Artsakh, and to go back to Washington and to meet with the administration and the State Department.
The exodus of Armenians of NK followed the policy of ethnic cleansing of Azerbaijan and very recently a military aggression. The U.S. had stated that they will not tolerate ethnic cleansing in NK, but obviously they did. What's your comment on this?
I think we were all in shock, actually. I think even 2-3 days before the incursion, Yuri Kim said that they were going to keep the peace. And obviously, Azerbaijan does not keep its word, because I'm sure they had assurances from Azerbaijan that there would be no aggression, and there was aggression. It does frustrate us as Armenian Americans to have our own government grossly miscalculate what was a pure ethnic cleansing. Over 100,000 Armenians now have left Artsakh. President Aliyev has said that they have the right to live there, but it's obvious this is 100% ethnic cleansing. They've all left. It's an empty city. It's an empty region. There's nothing more to say. It is ethnic cleansing. The only thing that we can do now is look for international guarantees for the right to return. So Armenians should go back, if they would like, Artsakh seas, with international presence of monitors and security and peacekeepers, probably an international presence, so that they can live there, speak their language, have Armenian self-governance in the region. And that's a tall order, I understand, but that's the only way Armenians are going to go back after being ethnically cleansed from the region.
Mr. Barsamyan, during the 10 months of the blockade of ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, the West did not stir a finger. We heard a lot of statements condemning the actions, but there was no step taken. What makes you think that it is realistic to believe that an international presence will be, first of all, located in NK, and second of all, guarantee the return of ethnic Armenians?
I think the problem is there were no consequences, and there's still no consequences, that the Aliyev regime has gotten away with ethnic cleansing, and to this day, I don't see sanctions by the United States. I don't see sanctions by European community. I also feel that the Russians have a responsibility here. They failed on their peacekeeping mission. There was no peace after the war, and the peacekeeping mission, even though I believe some of them did try to protect the Armenians and some lost their lives, was grossly underestimated in terms of their peacekeeping mission. They should have brought in the OSCE co-chairs to have French, US, and Russians in the region. It was offered. They didn't take them up on their offer. So it leads us to believe that the Russians are responsible and may have actually ceded the territory to the Azeris. The U.S. has told us that they miscalculated. At least they admit that. I have not heard the Russian president admit that it was partly their fault. I think there's a lot of blame to go around here. I think we as diasporans and Armenian Americans also share the burden. We should have been harder on our governments to do the right thing. Europeans spoke the right language. The U.S. government said the right things. But at the end of the day, there was no peacekeeping. And that is something that Armenians cannot take for granted. You cannot take Azerbaijan at its word anymore. So in that case, the Azeris have said that they're no longer interested in the Zangezur corridor. I don't believe it. I believe that Armenia now has to defend its borders, their international borders. If the Azeris come across that border, it's no different than Ukraine, and the world community would have to support that incursion. But let's look at this from the perspective of how Azerbaijan needs to reverse what they just did. It is pure ethnic cleansing. There are no more Armenians left in Artsakh but 25 people. We need to reverse that. Those Armenians need to go back and live in the region with autonomy.
There is military cooperation between Armenia and France that is going on, happening right now. What realistic expectations of assistance should Armenia have from the United States under the circumstances?
I think similar. I applaud the French for bringing in military assistance. The foreign minister was here recently, the French foreign minister. I would like to see the Secretary of State come to Armenia and announce the same package. We have the situation where Armenia should be, if you look at the world right now and what's happening.
Is it realistic to expect that, though?
Yes, I think it is. I think for training, for assistance, for on the ground, I think it's time for the United States to step up to the table. If they want to, I think Armenia has to be a place where the French, the Americans, and the Russians all agree that there'll be non-aggression. This is one place that they can all work together at some level. I'm still optimistic, but that being said, there should be no aggression against Armenia, and they need defensive weaponry so that there is no aggression against Armenia. Now, the Russians are here. They have a base here. The French are coming in. The Americans should come in, and they should come in with a robust package of about $1 billion. You see recently with what's happening in Israel, Israel is being offered $10 billion. 1/10 of that, Armenia should get at least $1 billion. I'd like to see that, and I'd like to see the supplemental that Congress will pass. There's a bill that will be pending that they'll have assistance for Ukraine and from Israel. I'd like to see Armenia added to that supplemental at a $1 billion level.
To put it very bluntly, strategic cooperation comes before billions of dollars. And so do you see any prospect of strategic cooperation?
Yes, I think it's already been announced that there'll be a strategic meeting here in Armenia between the U.S. and Armenia. So those meetings are very important. When they hold those meetings, that's when they expand their program base. So again, I think that Armenia has been a good partner to the French, and they've created a closer connection. I think with the United States, again, a good partner. We as American Armenians are going to be very direct this time. We have an election coming up. A lot of Armenian Americans are not happy with the way Armenia and Artsakh were treated. The lip service is great, but we need action. So we're going to look to the U.S., and I hope that even citizens in Russia, Armenian citizens, will voice their concern and also say that they're disappointed. I mean, there's disappointment all around here. Also, I think there's disappointment, if President Aliyev wants a minority population, he cannot have that when 100,000 Armenians leave. So I really worry for the other minority groups in Azerbaijan. I don't think you can live there in peace. I don't see it becoming a more democratic country. So therefore, Armenians need outside protection if they are to return to Artsakh.
There's a peace regulation process that is going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan. How do you evaluate the U.S.'s facilitation efforts in it?
I think the U.S. has to be very realistic in a peace process. The Azeris have not made one agreement that they've kept, so they have to hold their feet to the fire. I believe the U.S. Will put pressure on Azerbaijan, but they need to put sanctions on Azerbaijan if it does not come to the peace process and have actual peace with Armenia.
Are there any sanctions in perspective?
Yes, there is a Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, and there's the Magnitsky Act, which allows them to sanction individuals in Azerbaijan. I cannot understand how...
But they've bypassed it.
907 has not been waived. So what happens is the president waives 907. The president did not waive 907, which means that it still is in effect. There are no weapons going to Azerbaijan until that waiver is put in place. And I believe that this is the time to put those sanctions on Azerbaijan. Also, I think we should be sanctioning the government of Azerbaijan directly because they're avoiding or the oil caps that are put in place. Soon after the Artsakh war, Russia signed a deal with Azerbaijan, $1 billion deal or even more, and therefore you can see what's happening, that Russian oil is being sold through Azerbaijan, and that, I believe, is a violation of the sanctions. Now, if we're gonna have sanctions busters all around, then we have a problem. So I would think the U.S. needs to hold Azerbaijan responsible for some of this, and there should be consequences to the bad actions of the administration, of the Azeri administration.
What's the next target on the agenda of the Armenian Assembly of America?
So I believe that this robust package is really necessary, and that has multi-vector package. So it's not just for humanitarian assistance, which is needed right now, but there also has to be military assistance, training. So it has to run the gamut. Even infrastructure. Now with all these Armenians here, unlike Azerbaijan, the Armenians are not being held in a camp to go back. So Armenians will have to decide soon whether or not they will go back. But we need housing, we need water infrastructure, schools, hospitals. All those are going to cost money, and the Europeans and the U.S. should participate in that at a very high level. We see that the UN is pledged about $1 billion. It's time for the rest of the world to step it up. At first, the package was $14 million from USAID. I believe that package will rise, and it should. There should be much more available for development of Armenia as a country at this point where it's a democracy. The difference is, in this region, we stand alone as a democracy. Even on US TV this week, they talked about Georgia backslipping from its democratic principles. Armenia has not slipped back, and I believe that it should be rewarded for that. But even more importantly, at this time of need, the U.S. and the Europeans should step up and support Armenia robustly.
Mr. Barsamyan, how does the Armenian community of America perceive what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh? The loss of de facto statehood as well as the forcible displacement.
Yeah, I think that nobody anticipated that everyone would leave. But that tells you how bad the situation was. When you have 10 months of starvation and blockade, and people have no freedom of movement, and as soon as they could move, you had the gas explosion, and therefore everyone said that's enough. So I believe that the Armenian community in America is angry, they're disappointed, but now they want action. So they want action from the U.S. government. The U.S. has a very large stick, and they need to use that stick. And there needs to be consequences. Now you see, we have another major problem with Israel and the Palestinians. And we feel very badly about that because there are Armenians who live in Palestine as Palestinian citizens, and we have Israeli Armenians who live there as well. So we need to get this right because the situation in those places are very, very costly to the world. Wouldn't you rather prevent these mass atrocities of genocide and ethnic cleansing? The amount of money it costs to repair those are far, far more than if you prevented them in the first place. So now we have Artsakh sitting there empty, and Armenians are going to need to go back. But under what condition do they go back? So all of us in the United States are looking at it and are saying it's time that the U.S. step up, enforce some very strong policies in the region, and tell the adversaries of peace enough is enough, and to protect those vulnerable populations who live as minorities in these countries. U.S.
presidential elections are due in November, and I would like to know which of the candidates does the Armenian American community support?
Well, the Armenian Assembly is nonpartisan, so we don't take sides in that election. I will tell you that a lot of the Democrats I know since what happened in Artsakh have said they will sit this out. They may not vote for the Republican, but they're not going to support the Democrats. On the other side, it depends on who the Republican candidate is. There needs to be a very strong commitment to Armenia and Armenian Americans, and that's what we're looking for. The Armenian community has become very, very organized, and I have to hand it to those in these different states. No more are we in just California, New York, and Massachusetts, but Armenians are in Ohio, they're in Texas, they're in the heartland states, which really count now. Michigan is a very important state. Nevada is an important state. Those states have significant numbers of Armenians, and they vote. So I would still like to see the Democrats and the Republicans really think hard and not take for granted the Armenian vote. And this is a time when Armenian Americans will get very engaged in the process, as I'm engaged in the process. I'm in Washington, D.C. every month, and I encourage them to work hard on behalf of Armenia. I think we failed, though. I think it was a failure on what happened in Artsakh. We warned them, and the policymakers said what happened was predicted by us and predictable. They didn't prevent it.
What should the candidates offer the Armenian American community to win their favor and their vote?
I think they need to understand that Armenia is a democracy, an emerging democracy that's delicate, so it needs security guarantees. So just like other places around the world where the United States works with other countries, as they're working in Ukraine with other countries, they need to work with the French, they need to work with India, they eventually will need to work with partners in the region. So in a lasting peace, you would have neighbors, Georgia, become partners in peacekeeping in this area. So we would like to see the countries moderate in the region. Certainly, we'd love to see Iran come online with the United States. Currently, the temperature is way too high because of Israel-Palestine. But at some point, that is going to be a crucial partner to the United States as it relates to Armenia.
How does Israel-Palestine conflict affect the Armenia-Azerbaijan regulation process?
I think it has a huge impact on it. I mean, the president of Turkey, President Erdogan, has come out clearly for Hamas. I think it's amazing that Azerbaijan has not said too much if you really look at it. It's Brenda Schaefer, who always is pro-Israeli in Azerbaijan and has worked for SOCAR, has said, you know, we stand by Israel and the Azeri relationship. I don't see her standing up right now saying that. It's not popular in Azerbaijan. I fear because a minority population in Azerbaijan is not treated the same as a minority population here in Armenia. I imagine the Jewish community in Azerbaijan is deathly afraid right now. In Turkey, they must be incredibly deathly afraid because there's 1 million people on the street chanting Hamas. And our job as Armenian Americans is not to pick sides in that dispute because we do have our Armenians on both sides of that. But we want peace. There needs to be an immediate de-escalation. What is happening right now is a tragedy to both Israelis and to Palestinians. It needs to stop now.
In your estimation, in which direction should the diaspora and the Armenian government work together?
So, as you know, we, as an American 501c3 organization, work with Armenia, but from a distance. We don't get involved internally. But they put out their priority list, Armenia does. We understand our priority list, which we make up internally among our board, and that is how we work together. So when we approach Congress, we have our agenda, Armenia has their agenda, and sometimes that overlaps, sometimes it doesn't. But I believe it's very important for the Armenian Assembly to work with every administration in Armenia. We are the voice of Armenian Americans clearly to Armenia. So it's U.S.-Armenia relations, our side from the citizens as American citizens. From Armenia, it's the Armenian voice speaking to America.
Thank you for this conversation one more time.
Thank you so much.
Co-chair of the Armenian Assembly of America, Énthonì Բարսամյան, sat down with the public TV tonight.